The radio crackled with static, then silence. In the operations center at Bagram Airfield, Colonel Marcus Hendricks stared at the tactical display showing 8 red dots surrounded by hostile territory in Afghanistan's Kunar province. The SEALs had been dark for 17 minutes. No communications, no GPS pings, just the terrible certainty that somewhere in that maze of ridgelines and Taliban strongholds, America's finest were fighting for their lives. "Sir, we've lost contact with Razor Team," the communications officer reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. Last transmission indicated they were compromised and taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Hendricks felt his jaw clench. The extraction window was closing fast. Every F-16 and Apache in theater was either grounded for maintenance, refueling, or already committed to operations 200 miles away. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with cloud cover dropping to dangerous levels. In 37 years of military service, he'd never felt this helpless. "What about the standby aircraft?" he demanded. "Negative, sir. Maintenance says the earliest we can have anything airborne is 45 minutes. The SEALs don't have 45 minutes." The silence in the operations center was deafening. 8 warriors were about to become statistics, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do about it. Hendricks had commanded thousands of missions, saved countless lives, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the machine had failed. Then, cutting through the despair like a blade, came a voice none of them expected. "Bagram Control, this is Viper 27 requesting immediate tasking." Every head in the operations center turned toward the radio. The voice was calm, professional, and distinctly female. Hendricks frowned. There were no female pilots assigned to combat missions in his area of operations. Every pilot was accounted for. "Viper 27, say again your designation and current position," the air traffic controller responded, confusion evident in his voice. "Bagram Control, Viper 27 is an F-16C Block 50. Currently airborne 30 miles southwest of your position. I have full ordnance load and am mission capable. I'm monitoring your emergency frequency and am available for immediate close air support." Hendricks grabbed the radio microphone. "Viper 27, this is Colonel Hendricks, base commander. Who authorized your flight? I show no aircraft scheduled for departure." A pause, then, "Sir, sometimes the book doesn't have all the answers. Those SEALs need help and I'm the only bird in the sky with teeth. Request permission to assist." The colonel stared at the radio, his mind racing. Unauthorized flight was a court-martial offense, but 8 men were dying in those mountains, and suddenly, impossibly, salvation had announced itself with the call sign Viper 27. The mystery of how an F-16 had materialized in his airspace would have to wait. Lives hung in the balance. In the mountains of Kunar province, Staff Sergeant Reese Maddox pressed his back against the cold rock, feeling the Taliban bullets chipping away at his cover. Around him, 7 other SEALs waited for a miracle that wasn't coming. Captain Elena "Ghost" Vasquez banked her F-16 through the mountain passes, her hands steady on the controls despite the turbulence. Below, 8 American warriors needed her. Above, the weight of 16 years of doubt and discrimination pressed down like the storm clouds gathering around her aircraft. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she would remind everyone why they called her Ghost. The radio crackled again. "Viper 27, you are cleared hot. Bring our boys home." Ghost smiled grimly behind her oxygen mask. She'd been waiting her entire career for this moment. The SEALs were about to discover that their guardian angel wore Air Force wings and had something to prove. Elena "Ghost" Vasquez had earned her call sign not for any supernatural abilities, but for her uncanny knack of appearing exactly where the enemy least expected her. Born in East Los Angeles to parents who had fled El Salvador's civil war, she had learned early that survival meant being underestimated, overlooked, and forgotten until the moment you struck back. The path to the cockpit had been paved with skepticism and systematic exclusion. Flight school instructors who questioned her physical strength, squadron commanders who assigned her to transport duties, while male pilots half her skill level flew combat missions. Peers who whispered that diversity quotas, not merit, had put her in the cockpit. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every passed-over opportunity had been filed away in the steel vault of her memory. But Alina possessed something her detractors lacked, an almost mystical understanding of her aircraft. The F-16 wasn't just a machine to her, it was an extension of her will, responsive to her touch like a perfectly trained mount. She could feel its moods through subtle vibrations in the stick, sense its limits through barely perceptible changes in engine tone. Other pilots flew their aircraft. Alina became one with hers. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Morrison, had relegated her to routine patrol missions and training exercises, despite her superior gunnery scores and tactical knowledge. Morrison, a legacy pilot whose father had flown in Vietnam, made no secret of his belief that women belonged in transport aircraft, not fighters. Alina's requests for combat assignments were met with patronizing smiles and lectures about unit cohesion. 3 weeks earlier, she had submitted yet another formal request for combat duty. Morrison's response had been swift and cutting. "Vasquez, you've got the scores, I'll give you that. But scores don't mean squat when bullets are flying and your wingman needs to know you won't fold under pressure. This isn't about gender, it's about proven performance under fire. Come back when you've got more than simulator time on your record." The irony wasn't lost on her. She couldn't get combat experience because she lacked combat experience. It was a catch-22 that had derailed countless careers before hers, but Alina was different. She refused to accept limitation as destiny. Tonight's mission had begun as a routine night training exercise. Alina had been practicing instrument approaches in marginal weather conditions, hunting skills that Morrison insisted she needed before he would consider her for anything more demanding. She had been monitoring multiple radio frequencies, a habit that had served her well throughout her career, when she heard the desperate transmissions from Kunar province. The decision to divert had taken less than 3 seconds. Alina knew the regulations, understood the consequences, but she also knew something Morrison and his ilk didn't. Courage isn't measured by what you're allowed to do, but by what you choose to do when no one is watching. Now, streaking through the Afghan night toward a firefight that would define her career, Alina felt the familiar calm that settled over her in moments of crisis. Her aircraft hummed beneath her, loaded with precision-guided munitions and a 20mm cannon that could tear through armor like paper. The SEALs below had no idea that their salvation wore lieutenant's bars and had been fighting for respect her entire career. The mountains ahead glowed faintly in her night vision display, peaks and valleys rendered in electronic green. Somewhere in that maze of stone and shadow, 8 warriors were making their last stand. Staff Sergeant Reese Maddox counted muzzle flashes in the darkness and didn't like the math. 47 Taliban fighters, maybe more, had them pinned in a depression that barely qualified as cover. His team had been conducting reconnaissance on a high-value target when the trap had been sprung. Now they were paying the price for intelligence that had been either compromised or deliberately falsified. "How's our ammo situation?" he whispered into his throat mic, keeping his voice below the Taliban's likely hearing threshold. The responses came back in terse, professional whispers: 60%, half a mag plus backup, running low on 40 mic. The numbers painted a grim picture. They had maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire before they'd be down to sidearms and harsh language. Petty Officer First Class Jake Hambone Hamilton, their communications specialist, worked frantically with the radio, trying to raise anyone who could provide immediate support. The mountains played hell with radio signals, turning their state-of-the-art equipment into expensive paperweights. "Still nothing from base," Hambone reported. "These damn ridgelines are blocking everything." Maddox nodded grimly. They were on their own, which was exactly how the Taliban had planned it. Intelligence suggested the enemy had been tracking SEAL movements for weeks, learning patrol patterns and communication schedules. Tonight's mission had walked straight into a perfectly prepared killing field. The Taliban fire was disciplined and coordinated. No wild spraying or emotional outbursts. These weren't farm boys with AK-47s. They were experienced fighters who understood that patience and ammunition conservation would eventually win the day. They could afford to wait. The Americans could not. "Movement 2 o'clock," whispered Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Diesel Thompson, their heavy weapons specialist. 3 tangos moving up the ridgeline. Maddox tracked the movement through his night vision scope. The Taliban were executing a classic pincer movement, using the terrain to mask their approach while maintaining suppressive fire from fixed positions. It was textbook small unit tactics, and it was working. "Take the shot when you have it," Maddox ordered. Diesel's rifle barked once, and one of the moving figures dropped. The other 2 immediately took cover, but the damage was done. They'd bought maybe 5 minutes before the next attempt. The Taliban response was immediate and overwhelming. Heavy machine gun fire raked their position, forcing all 8 SEALs to press themselves against the rocky ground. Chunks of stone exploded around them, filling the air with sharp fragments and choking dust. "This is Razor Team Leader to any station, Maddox transmitted on the emergency frequency. "We are 8 souls, heavily engaged, grid coordinates follow." He rattled off their position, knowing the transmission was probably bouncing uselessly off mountain peaks. Above them, hidden by clouds and darkness, Lieutenant Elena Vasquez adjusted her heading based on the GPS coordinates she'd copied from the emergency transmission. The F-16's radar was painting multiple targets, but she needed visual confirmation before engaging. The last thing anyone needed was friendly fire on an already catastrophic night. The scene below revealed itself gradually through her targeting pod's thermal imaging. 8 heat signatures clustered in defensive positions, surrounded by dozens of enemy fighters moving with tactical precision. It was exactly the kind of situation that required surgical strikes and perfect timing. Ghost keyed her radio. "Razor Team, this is Viper 2-7. I have your position marked and am standing by for close air support. Describe your tactical situation." Elena's F-16 carved through the night sky above Kunar province like a predatory bird, her thermal imaging system painting the battlefield in stark detail. Below, the 8 SEAL heat signatures hugged whatever cover they could find while enemy muzzle flashes sparkled like deadly fireflies across the ridgelines. She had arrived at the critical moment when professional warriors faced the arithmetic of attrition. "Viper 2-7, this is Razor Team Leader," came the strained voice of Staff Sergeant Maddox. "We're taking effective fire from multiple positions. Estimate 40 to 50 enemy fighters in prepared positions. We need immediate suppression of targets bearing 270 through 340 degrees from our position." Elena studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating angles, blast radii, and collateral damage estimates. The Taliban had chosen their positions well, using natural rock formations that would limit the effectiveness of conventional ordnance. This required precision, not overwhelming firepower. "Razor Team, understand you need fires on the western ridgeline. I'm seeing multiple heat signatures in those positions. Be advised, I'll be making gun runs to minimize blast radius near your position. Keep your heads down and mark your boundaries with infrared strobes if you have them." "Copy that, Viper, popping IR now." Elena watched 8 small infrared beacons appear on her targeting display, clearly delineating the SEAL positions. The enemy had no idea they were being painted by systems far more sophisticated than anything they'd encountered. Time to introduce them to 21st century warfare. She rolled inverted and pulled the F-16 into a steep diving attack, her G-suit automatically inflating to keep blood flowing to her brain as acceleration pressed her deep into the ejection seat. The aircraft shuddered slightly as she exceeded normal operational parameters, pushing both machine and pilot toward their limits. The Taliban fighters below had no warning. One moment they were methodically placing fire on trapped Americans. The next, 20-millimeter cannon shells were exploding among their positions with surgical precision. Alina's first gun run lasted exactly 6 seconds and eliminated 3 machine gun nests that had been pouring fire onto the SEALs. She pulled up sharply, afterburners lighting the night as she climbed for another attack run. Behind her, secondary explosions suggested she'd hit ammunition stores. The Taliban fire slackened noticeably as surviving fighters reassessed their situation. Viper 27, that was beautiful work, Maddox transmitted. You bought us some breathing room. We've got movement on the eastern approach now, approximately 20 tangos moving to flank our position. Alina banked hard left, searching for the new threat. Her radar warning receiver remained quiet. The Taliban had no surface-to-air missiles in this sector. She owned the sky, but the SEALs still owned the ground, and that ground was becoming increasingly hostile. I see them, she confirmed, watching heat signatures moving in single file along a goat path barely visible in the thermal imaging. Moving to engage. This attack would be different. The eastern slope offered better concealment for the enemy, but also better angles for her weapon systems. Alina selected her remaining precision-guided munition, a single 500-pound bomb that would send a message about the cost of threatening American forces. The targeting solution locked perfectly. Alina pickled off the bomb and immediately began evasive maneuvers, knowing that every pilot's greatest vulnerability came in the seconds after weapon release. The bomb's impact lit up the mountainside like daylight, the shockwave visible through her aircraft's sensors as it rolled across the valley. When the smoke cleared, the eastern approach was silent. Razor Team, this is Viper 27. Eastern approach is neutralized. What's your situation? Viper, you just saved our bacon. Enemy fire has decreased significantly. We count at least 15 enemy KIA from your runs. Outstanding work up there. Alina felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dreamed of since her first flight lesson. Combat wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about bringing Americans home alive. Tonight, she was writing her own permission slip. But the night was far from over, and the Taliban were adapting faster than she'd anticipated. The silence that followed Alina's bombing run lasted exactly 93 seconds. Then the mountains erupted in coordinated gunfire as Taliban reinforcements arrived from positions the thermal imaging hadn't detected. Hidden caves and carefully camouflaged fighting positions revealed themselves as muzzle flashes bloomed across 3 separate ridgelines. Viper 27 were taking fire from new positions. Maddox's voice carried a note of alarm that made Alina's blood run cold. They've got us bracketed from 3 sides now. This was a setup. Alina banked sharply, her F-16 responding instantly to her inputs as she surveyed the expanded battlefield. The Taliban had used their initial positions as bait, drawing both the SEALs and any supporting aircraft into a larger kill zone. It was a sophisticated ambush that spoke to enemy intelligence and planning capabilities far beyond what intelligence reports had suggested. Razor Team, I count 60+ new heat signatures. These guys were waiting for us. Alina's voice remained steady despite the growing complexity of the tactical situation. I'm going to need to make multiple attack runs to clear all these positions. Can you hold for another 10 minutes? Negative on 10 minutes, came Hambone's voice, replacing Maddox on the radio. Razor Leader is hit. We've got 3 wounded and we're down to basic ammunition loads. 5 minutes, maybe less. Alina felt the familiar ice-cold focus settle over her mind. The luxury of methodical attack runs had just evaporated. Now it was about speed, accuracy, and accepting the kind of risk that made insurance companies nervous and commanders gray-haired. She selected her remaining ordnance, one precision-guided bomb and approximately 800 rounds of 20 ammunition. Against 60 Taliban fighters in prepared positions, it would have to be enough. Failure wasn't just career-ending, it was soul-destroying. Razor Team, I'm going to make rapid sequential attacks on all three ridgelines. When I call break, 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 you move to your extraction point. Don't stop, don't look back, just run like hell toward the LZ. Copy that, Viper, we'll be ready. Alina pushed the F-16 into a high G turn that compressed her vision to a tunnel, her aircraft groaning as she exceeded normal flight envelope parameters. The Taliban were about to learn what happened when you threatened American forces under the protection of someone who had spent 16 years being told she wasn't good enough for this exact moment. Her first target was the western ridgeline, where heavy machine guns had been laying down suppressive fire. Alina dove at nearly vertical angle, her targeting computer struggling to maintain lock as she approached the edge of controlled flight. At the last possible second, she released her final guided bomb and pulled up so sharply that her aircraft shuddered on the edge of stalling. The explosion lit up the entire valley, silhouetting jagged peaks against the orange fireball. When her vision cleared, the western ridgeline was silent. "One down, two to go," she muttered, already lining up her next attack. The eastern positions opened fire as she approached, green tracers reaching up toward her aircraft like deadly Christmas lights. Alina jinked left and right, using every evasive maneuver she'd ever learned while maintaining her attack heading. The 20 cannon fired in controlled bursts, each one precisely placed to maximum effect. She was no longer just providing close air support. She was conducting a one-woman war, and she was winning. Alina's F-16 screamed across the northern ridgeline at near-supersonic speed, her cannon firing in precise 2-second bursts that walked destruction across the Taliban positions like a conductor directing a deadly orchestra. Each pass required flying between mountain peaks with margins measured in feet, the kind of flying that separated competent pilots from legends. The Taliban fighters below had never faced anything like this. They trained to fight helicopters and slow-moving attack aircraft, not a fighter pilot who treated mountain flying like an art form. Alina used the terrain itself as a weapon, disappearing behind peaks only to emerge from unexpected angles with guns blazing. "Jesus Christ," whispered Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Viking Larson, watching tracer fire arc across the sky above them. "Who the hell is this pilot?" Maddox, blood seeping through a field dressing on his shoulder, managed a tight smile. "I don't know, but remind me to buy her a beer if we get out of this." Alina had completed 4 attack runs in 6 minutes, using her cannon with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Each burst was calculated to maximum effect, while minimizing risk to the SEALs below. The Taliban fire was becoming sporadic and disorganized as their command structure dissolved under the relentless assault. "Razor Team, this is Viper 2-7. I show significantly reduced enemy activity on all 3 ridgelines. What's your status?" "Viper, Razor Team Leader," Hambone responded. "We've got movement capability. 3 walking wounded, but all 8 souls accounted for. Enemy fire has decreased by about 80%. You magnificent bastard, you actually did it." Alina felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the cockpit heater. For 16 years, she'd been fighting for moments like this. The validation wasn't in the praise, though that helped. It was in the knowledge that 8 American warriors would see tomorrow because she'd been good enough when it mattered most. "Don't get sentimental yet," she transmitted. "I'm Winchester on guided munitions but still have cannon rounds. Start moving to your extraction point. I'll provide overwatch until the cavalry arrives." The SEALs began their tactical withdrawal, moving in the disciplined bounds that had kept them alive through countless operations. Alina maintained a high orbit above them, her aircraft's sensors sweeping continuously for signs of renewed enemy activity. The Taliban weren't done. They were regrouping. Her fuel gauge showed 30 minutes of flight time remaining. The nearest recovery airfield was 18 minutes away at current fuel consumption rates. The math was tight, but manageable as long as nothing went wrong. In Alina's experience, something always went wrong. Viper 27, this is Bagram Control. Colonel Hendrick's voice cut through the radio static. What's your fuel state? Bagram, Viper 27. I'm showing 4,000 pounds remaining. Good for another 30 mics of station time. Copy that. Be advised, we're launching additional support aircraft, but they're still 20 minutes out. Can you maintain overwatch until then? Alina glanced at her fuel gauge again. 20 minutes would put her dangerously close to minimum fuel for recovery, especially if she had to maneuver aggressively. But the SEALs were still exposed, still vulnerable to counterattack. Affirmative, Bagram. I can hold station for 20 mics. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But some lies were worth telling when lives hung in the balance. The Taliban counterattack began just as Alina had predicted. Fresh fighters emerged from concealed positions on the southern slopes, moving with the desperate aggression of men who knew their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. They had maybe 15 minutes to finish the SEALs before American reinforcements arrived in overwhelming force. Alina watched the enemy movement on her targeting display and made rapid calculations. She had enough cannon ammunition for 3, maybe 4 more attack runs. After that, she'd be reduced to psychological intimidation and prayer. Razor Team, you've got fresh contacts moving up from the south. Approximately 20 fighters moving fast toward your 6 o'clock position. Copy that, Viper, we see them. How much gas you got left up there? Alina looked at her fuel gauge and lied again. Enough, keep moving to the LZ. I'll handle the party crashers. She rolled the F-16 inverted and pulled into another screaming dive, her cannon already locked onto the lead elements of the Taliban assault. The enemy had made a critical mistake. They were moving in the open, probably thinking the mysterious F-16 had expended its ordnance. They were about to learn otherwise. Alina's cannon fire ripped through the advancing Taliban fighters with devastating effect. The 20 rounds, designed to destroy armored vehicles, turned human bodies into red mist and scattered the assault formation like leaves in a windstorm. The survivors dove for whatever cover they could find, their carefully planned attack dissolving into chaos. But Alina's victory came with a cost. During her attack run, she'd noticed her fuel consumption spiking beyond normal parameters. A quick glance at the engine instruments revealed the problem. She was leaking fuel from her left external tank, probably from shrapnel damage during her low-altitude passes. The math had just changed dramatically. Instead of 20 minutes of flight time, she now had maybe 12. The SEALs were still 8 minutes from their extraction point, and the supporting aircraft were still 15 minutes out. Alina faced a choice that would define not just her career, but her character. She could withdraw immediately and probably make it back to base safely. Or she could stay and protect the SEALs, knowing that doing so might cost her everything. She keyed her radio. Razor Team, this is Viper 27. Continue to extraction point. I've got your back. Below, 8 American warriors continued their fighting withdrawal, unaware that their guardian angel was flying on borrowed time and limitless courage. Alina's fuel leak was getting worse. The external tank was now streaming precious JP-8 in a visible trail that painted her position for any enemy fighter pilots who might be lurking in the area. She had to jettison the compromised tank before it became a liability, but doing so would cut her remaining flight time to single digits. Bagram Control, this is Viper 27. I'm experiencing fuel leak from left external tank. Request clearance to jettison. Viper 27, cleared to jettison external stores. What's your current fuel state? Alina watched the fuel quantity tick downward with mechanical precision. Bagram, I'm showing 2,800 pounds and decreasing. The leak is getting worse. There was a pause that spoke volumes. Everyone monitoring the radio frequency understood what those numbers meant. Alina was rapidly approaching the point where returning to base would become mathematically impossible. Viper 27, recommend immediate return to base, came Hendrick's voice, heavy with the weight of command decisions. We're vectoring other assets to support Razor Team. Negative Bagram. The other assets are still 12 minutes out. Razor Team needs continuous overwatch until they reach the extraction point. Alina's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had already made an irreversible decision. I'm staying on station. She jettisoned the leaking external tank, watching it tumble into the darkness below. The F-16 immediately felt lighter, more responsive, but the fuel remaining in her internal tanks would only carry her so far. Alina had just committed herself to a one-way mission unless something changed dramatically. Below, the SEALs continued their tactical movement toward the extraction point, bounding from cover to cover, while Taliban fighters attempted to reestablish contact. Maddox's shoulder wound was slowing him down, but his team maintained their discipline and mutual support that had kept them alive through 6 combat deployments. Razor Team, this is Viper. I'm showing new movement from the east. Looks like they're trying to cut off your route to the LZ. Alina identified the threat immediately. A squad of Taliban fighters moving through a dry creek bed that would put them directly in the SEALs' path. If they reached the choke point first, the extraction would become a slaughter. Viper 27, we don't have enough ammo to fight through a blocking position, Maddox transmitted. Can you clear the creek bed? Alina checked her ammunition counter. 340 rounds of 20 remaining. Enough for one good gun run, maybe 2 if she was extremely conservative. The creek bed offered natural protection for the enemy, meaning she'd have to get dangerously low to be effective. Stand by, Razor Team. I'm going to clear your path. Alina rolled into her attack run, diving at an angle that would have made her flight instructors reach for their emergency procedures manual. The F-16 screamed toward the earth at nearly 600 miles per hour, her targeting computer struggling to maintain lock as the ground rushed up to meet her. At the last possible second, she opened fire. The 20 cannon barked in a sustained burst that lasted 4 seconds and expended 200 rounds. The creek bed erupted in explosions and flying debris as high-explosive shells turned rock and earth into deadly projectiles. Alina pulled up so violently that her vision grayed at the edges, the G-forces pushing her to the edge of consciousness. But when her head cleared, the creek bed was silent. The blocking position had been eliminated. Razor Team, your path is clear. Move now, move fast. The SEALs needed no encouragement. They bounded forward in perfect tactical formation, covering each other's movement as they closed the distance to their extraction point. Behind them, the surviving Taliban fighters were beginning to reorganize, but slowly and cautiously. The mysterious F-16 had shattered their confidence and decimated their ranks. Alina climbed back to altitude, her fuel gauge now showing critical levels. She had maybe 8 minutes of flight time remaining, and the nearest airfield was 12 minutes away even at maximum speed. The mathematics of death were catching up with her, 1 gallon at a time. Alina's fuel gauge read 1,800 pounds and falling. Each minute of flight time was consuming roughly 200 pounds of JP8, and her calculations showed she'd flame out approximately 4 minutes before reaching any suitable airfield. The F-16's engine would quit somewhere over the Hindu Kush Mountains, leaving her with a decision between ejecting into Taliban territory or attempting a dead stick landing in terrain that had killed more pilots than enemy action. But below, the SEALs were still 3 minutes from their extraction point, moving through terrain that channeled them into predictable routes. Alina's thermal imaging showed Taliban fighters repositioning to intercept them at a narrow pass that offered no alternative routes. Without continued air support, the rescue mission would end in tragedy despite everything they'd accomplished. Bagram Control, this is Viper 27. Request immediate vector to nearest emergency landing strip. Viper 27, closest suitable field is Jalalabad, bearing 095 degrees, 42 nautical miles. You are cleared direct. Alina computed the distance against her fuel remaining and accepted what she'd known since jettisoning the external tank. She wasn't going home tonight. At least, not the normal way. Razor Team, this is Viper 27. I show enemy movement converging on the mountain pass ahead of your position. Multiple squads, approximately 30 fighters total. Copy Viper, we see them. Can you give us one more gun run? Alina's ammunition counter showed 140 rounds remaining. Enough for 30 seconds of sustained fire if she was careful, or 15 seconds if she wasn't. The Taliban positions were well prepared and would require multiple attack runs to suppress effectively. Affirmative Razor Team. Danger close fire support inbound. Mark your positions and stay low. She pushed the F-16 into another diving attack, this time approaching from the north to avoid flying through her own previous gun run debris. The Taliban fighters in the pass had learned from watching their comrades die. They held their fire until she was committed to her attack run, then unleashed everything they had. Green tracers filled the air around Alina's aircraft like an anti-aircraft fireworks display. Her radar warning receiver screamed warnings about multiple targeting systems, though none capable of actually engaging her aircraft. The psychological effect was still significant. Flying through concentrated small arms fire required nerves that most people simply didn't possess. Alina's return fire was devastatingly accurate. Her cannon rounds walked through the Taliban positions with mechanical precision, each burst calculated to maximum effect. When she pulled up from the attack run, 12 enemy fighters lay dead or dying in the mountain pass. But the victory was Pyrrhic. Alina's fuel gauge now showed 1,400 pounds, and her engine was beginning to show the subtle signs of fuel starvation that preceded total failure. She had maybe 6 minutes before the F-16 became a gliding brick. Razor Team, the pass is clear. Move to extraction now. Moving Viper and, thank you, we know what you're risking up there. Alina didn't respond immediately. The SEALs understood military aviation well enough to read between the lines of her fuel situation and continued presence over the battlefield. They knew she was trading her safety for theirs, and that knowledge made their movement toward extraction even more urgent. As the SEALs bounded through the cleared mountain pass, Alina climbed to maximum altitude, trying to stretch every remaining pound of fuel. Her radio crackled with multiple transmissions as the rescue operation expanded to include her imminent emergency. Viper 27, this is Rescue Control. We're launching search and rescue assets to your anticipated crash site. Maintain radio contact and prepare for possible ejection. Alina looked down at the moonlit mountains below, their beauty unmarred by the violence that had just swept across their slopes. Somewhere down there, 8 American warriors were moving toward safety because she'd chosen duty over self-preservation. It was a choice she'd make again, without hesitation. The F-16's low fuel warning light illuminated Alina's cockpit in amber urgency, accompanied by an electronic tone that fighter pilots learned to dread. She had approximately 4 minutes of flight time remaining at current consumption rates, and the nearest suitable landing site was still 8 minutes away. The mathematics were unforgiving. Her engine would quit while still airborne, and she'd have to choose between ejecting into hostile territory or attempting a dead-stick landing. Razor Team, what's your status? Alina transmitted, her voice maintaining professional calm despite the desperate circumstances. Viper 27, Razor Team is 2 minutes from extraction point. We can see the LZ and it looks clear. How are you doing up there? Alina glanced at her fuel gauge and made another quick calculation. If she stayed on station for 2 more minutes to ensure the SEALs reached safety, she'd be ejecting over Taliban-controlled territory with zero chance of recovery before enemy forces reached her position. If she left immediately, she might make it to friendly territory before her engine quit. I'm doing fine, Razor Team. Maintain your movement to the LZ. It was another lie, but one that served the mission. Alina had learned long ago that sometimes leadership meant absorbing fear so others could focus on survival. Her radar warning receiver detected multiple aircraft approaching from the southeast, the relief force finally arriving as promised. 2 F-16s and an AC-130 gunship, more than enough firepower to secure the area and provide cover for the SEAL extraction. But they were still 90 seconds away, and the Taliban had one last card to play. Viper 27, I'm picking up new movement on thermal. Large group moving fast from the northwest, Alina reported, her voice tight with concentration. Estimate 40-plus fighters, moving to interdict Razor Team before extraction. This was the Taliban's final gambit. Throw everything they had at the Americans before the overwhelming firepower arrived. It was desperate, but it might work if Alina couldn't stop them. She had 140 rounds of 20 ammunition remaining and maybe 3 minutes of fuel. The charging Taliban fighters were spread across nearly a mile of rough terrain, too dispersed for a single gun run to be decisive. Alina would have to make multiple passes, each one bringing her closer to fuel exhaustion. Razor Team, enemy reinforcements inbound from the northwest. Heavy numbers moving fast. I'm going to buy you time, but you need to reach that LZ in the next 90 seconds. Copy that, Viper, we're moving. Alina rolled into her attack run, pushing the F-16 into another vertical dive that strained both aircraft and pilot beyond normal limits. The Taliban fighters below were running in loose formation across open ground, making themselves perfect targets for strafing runs. They'd abandoned tactical discipline for speed, hopping to overwhelm the Americans through sheer numbers. It was exactly the kind of mistake that separated experienced fighters from dead ones. Alina's cannon fire swept through the charging Taliban formation like a scythe through wheat. Her attack run lasted exactly 6 seconds and eliminated nearly half the charging fighters. The survivors scattered for cover, their cohesive assault dissolving into individual survival instincts. She pulled.